So we're in the book of Genesis. We usually go line by line, verse by verse through books of the Bible, and we've been in Genesis for quite a while. We're a little over, just over halfway through, really, and we're picking up where we left off last week. But what we're going to talk about this week is basically this, is that life is full of trade-offs, and you all know that, right? Like, we may not recognize it in everyday life, but life is full of trade-offs. We trade one thing for another. We can't have everything, right? It just doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. And is there anyone here, just as an example, right, that would make me this trade? Like, I will trade a new car today for your retirement account 20 years in the future. Like, you know, you keep putting your money in every week, and like, I'll trade you a new car today for your retirement account or your 401k or your IRA or whatever it is 20 years from now, you know, your retirement account. Like, that's not a good trade, right? Because, you know, you might, hey, I got a new car today, that's great, but, you know, 20 years from now, that car is going to be rusted and gone away, and you're going to be on 2 or 3 more cars at least, you know, probably 2 if you're me, but anyway. But you know, that car is going to be gone and forgot about, and then it's going to come time for you to retire, and you're not going to have anything. You're going to regret that trade in the future, right? See, you want the new car today. That's immediate. You know, it's immediate gratification. You know, we are like that, or at least I'm like that. We like things immediately. We like immediate gratification. In fact, you know what the problem is with immediate gratification? It takes too long, right? Like we like to watch the microwave because the 2 minutes goes quicker when we stand there and go, come on, right? Like, for things to cook, because we don't like to wait for things, right? And I don't like to wait for things. But you want that new car if that trade is for you, and you know what? That's immediate, right? That's today. Hey, today I get to drive a new car, right? But tomorrow, right, it's really important to have a retirement, like when you can't work anymore, right? That you have a nest egg, that you have something to sustain you at that time. And so that's the difference between the immediate and, I guess you could say, the important. Now, we're familiar with trades like that. If you think back in your life or in the life of somebody you know or something like that, we often make deals and trades like that. So, for example, think of like a father or mother who worked for extra money when their kids were young. And you know what? Like, after their kids grow up, they're like, I can't get that time back. And I don't even know what we did with the money, you know, like for that extra money. It's not like a matter of just feeding the family, but we worked overtime and we did those things. And, you know, when our kids grow up or when our kids are older, you know, we're like, man, I wish I had that time back, right? You traded time with your family for extra money or extra stuff. Maybe it's between a husband and a wife. Maybe it's between your kids when your kids grow up, right? Whatever it is, you're trading one thing for another. And like I said, we can't have everything. Life is a trade-off, and you trade one thing for another, right? Maybe parents who didn't discipline their child when their child was young, like a toddler, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you know what I mean? Like, ever, right? They don't discipline their kids growing up, you know, when they're young. And the reason why is because, you know what, I just want peace now. Give them the toy. Give them the candy. Give them whatever it is. Give them whatever they want. I just want them to shut up. I just want them to leave me alone. I just want some peace and quiet, right? But they're trading ease, peace, what's easy now, right, for, you know, sometime in the future, there's not going to be peace, right? Sometime in the future, there's going to be a lot more chaos in the family. There's going to be a lot more things, like instead of, you know, time out, you know, now I'm paying bail, you know, like those kinds of things. Or instead of a small thing when they're young and disciplining them, you know, and maybe having an unpeaceful house, you know, when they're 2, 3, 4 years old, you know, you have an unpeaceful house when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, right? You're trading one thing for another. The immediate, right, for the future, I guess you could say. Or maybe a student. If you're a student or you're a high school student, a college student, whatever it is, a student who spends all their time socializing when they should be studying, right? And they're trading what? They're trading the fun now, right? The social aspects of school or college now, right, for good grades in the future. Like, you know, I should have been studying, I wasn't studying, I was socializing, and now my grades suck, or I have to cram for the test, or I have to do whatever, and your grades suffer because you traded one thing for another, right? And like I said, we can't have everything, right? Life is full of trade-offs, right? We can't have everything. And in fact, you and I know this, but it's worth repeating and reminding ourselves that we only have so much time. You're only going to be alive for so many years. You only have so many hours in the day. You only have so many days in the week. You only have so many weeks in a year, right? You only have so much time that you've been allotted in this life. And you only have so much money, right? I mean, none of us or nobody I know, their money is unlimited. If it is unlimited, let me know because I want to have a conversation with you, right? So we only have so much time. We only have so much money. We only have so much energy, right? Like you can only go so many hours and put so much energy into so many people or so many things and so many, running around and your schedule and things like that. You only have so much energy that you can spend or devote to something in a day, in a week, in a year, in a lifetime, right? And you only have so much attention. I only have this many hours, then I can pay attention to this, or I can be on social media, right? Or I can do this, or I can do this other thing. I can, whatever it is, right? Life is a trade-off, and you only have a limited amount of resources, whatever it is. The question is, how will you spend it? How will you spend the limited amount of money that you have, the limited amount of time that you have, the limited amount of energy you have, the limited amount of, attention that you can devote to something? How will you spend it? See, we can all be tempted by these kinds of trades, like the one that I mentioned earlier, right? The trade where, we trade today for the future, right? I want peace today, but you know what? It's going to cost me peace in the future. I want a new car today, but it's going to cost me security in my retirement in the future, right? I want, this now, but it's going to cost me something, right? We often trade today for the future, and we often trade basically the same thing, which is the immediate for the important. We have something we want immediately, and we trade it for the important, something that's really important maybe in the future, right? And when we make these kinds of trades, we often wind up regretting them in the future. Just like the parent who works, and then their kids grow up and don't need them anymore, and they're like, how do I get that time back? Or, they spend all their time working and their marriage falls apart, and, it's like, what do I do with that? If I could go back in time, but you can't. We can't. If I could do this, if I knew what the future held, right? But you just don't know, right? And we may miss out on something because of that trade, those trades that we make, right? You might miss out on something. Maybe you'll miss out on the blessing of a healthy family because you spent all your time and devotion and energy somewhere else other than on your family. You're robbing your family in a way, right? Maybe you'll miss out on something like you'll miss out on enjoying your children when they get older because you didn't discipline them when they were younger, and now, they're annoying and hard to be around, right? Don't be afraid. I tell parents this all the time. Don't be, and I should tell myself this too, right? I mean, as a parent, right? Like, it's hard, but don't be afraid that your kids won't like you. Be afraid that you won't like your kids, and neither will anybody else, right? Don't be afraid that they won't like you, so you're afraid to discipline them, right? So, we might miss out on something, though. We might miss out on enjoying our children when they get older. And like if you're that student or something like that, you might miss out on certain privileges, like going to the next grade because you didn't pass, right? Because you didn't study, because you spent all your time socializing. Or you might miss out on having a college degree because you spent all your time, majoring in beer studies or something like that, right? And so you don't get a degree, you get a loan, and you've got a bill to pay, but you have no degree to show for it, right? But the issue is that we traded one thing for another when all we have really is limited resources. What we're going to see now, today though, is that we're all in danger of being tempted to make the same kinds of trades, right, when it comes to our participation in God's plan. That when it comes to participating in God's plan and being a part of God's plan and being blessed by God, that we can often be tempted to make those same kind of trades where you would trade the present for the future, or the immediate for the future, or you would trade the immediate for the important, right? And trading the important for the immediate, or trading the present for the future, almost always leads to regret. And it's the same thing in our decision to participate, or how we participate, I guess you can say, in God's plan. So, how can we avoid regret when it comes to our participation in God's plan? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're picking up where we left off last week in Genesis 25. You can follow along in your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, let me know. We'll get you one. But I'll put the verses up on the screen. And so we're in Genesis 25 today, from verse 21 to 34. And let me remind you as we go back to Genesis, right, that this is what we were talking about. We were talking about last week Abraham's death. Remember, Abraham is the guy that God chose, and God was working through him. He was the prototypical man saved by faith, right with God through faith, and not through what he did, but by trusting the promise that God made him. And he made him a promise that he was going to have a promised son. And then through that son, certain things would happen. There were certain things that he promised to that son and to his lineage through that son. Isaac, right? That was the son, right? And so last week we saw that Abraham had died, and we saw a little bit about Isaac's family. Isaac married Rebekah, to remind you, and so now it's a new couple, right? You know, it's not Abraham, but it's his son who had his faith that God was going to work through. And Isaac came from now a believing family. So Abraham was the first. He was the first Jew, right? He was taken out of an idol-worshiping area and family in a bad city, and not a good dad who worshipped idols, I guess you could say. And he started out life worshiping idols, but then he became God's guy. God picked him. God worked on him, worked through him, right? Not because he was good, but because God is good, and because he believed the promise, and God credited righteousness to him through that belief that Abraham had. But now, right? This is great news, right? Now, what's going to happen now? Because Isaac, right, comes from a believing family. His father was a believer. His mother was a believer, right? And the hope is that, he's going to go even further than his father did, right? Things are going to end up even better, right? I know I had this misconception when I became a Christian, because I was kind of the first Christian in my family, and I thought, if I work for Christians, things will go smoother, and if I'm around other Christians, things will be different than it was when it didn't work out that way, because everybody's still a sinner, right? But what his family is going to look like is what we're going to see today. So what is Isaac's family going to look like? Should look even better than Abraham's, right? And how, here's the question, how is God going to carry on his plan through Isaac's line now, right? So through Abraham's son, Isaac, God was going to extend his plan and his promise to Abraham's descendants. How is God going to extend, his work and his plan through Isaac's line now and Isaac's descendants? And that's what we're going to be looking at now. So Isaac prayed to the Lord. Okay, he's a believing guy, right? He prays to the Lord. And we looked at this verse last week, and I'll refresh you a little bit, you remember you a little bit. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. And so what we saw last week was basically this, that Isaac responded differently than his father Abraham did. Abraham, what did he do? He had all kinds of sin in his life. He pimped out his wife, right? And then he slept with his wife's young servant, I guess you could say, or young slave, and then she got pregnant so that he would have her, he would have a child with her, and then it would be his wife Sarah's child, like a surrogate mother kind of thing, and it would count like that, and there was all kinds of chaos, and because of this, there was all kinds of rivalry between the two brothers and who was going to be who, and one of them was jilted, right? And it all seemed craziness in the family. And like if you come from a family of divorce, or where there's children, from one mother and then another mother and another family, like you can probably relate to that. And we talked about that last week. But now Isaac, right? He doesn't do any of that. He's going to learn from his father's mistakes. We talked about that. And so the idea, hopefully, is now, there won't be rivalry between my children because none of that sin and sexual sin and no, children from different wives and stuff like that is going to happen in my family, right? So everything should be just fine. The babies jostled each other while within her, right? Because she's pregnant, because God answered Isaac's prayer for his wife who couldn't have a baby, right? And the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So apparently it's not just like kicking. Like I remember when my wife was pregnant, we were in Walmart one time, and she was very pregnant, and she's standing there, and she's like, look at this. And like a foot is like was like something from Alien or something, and like you could see hands and feet and all kinds of stuff. It's like, that's crazy. Anyway, but this is like, there's something going on in her stomach that is not normal, not just a kick or something like that. But the babies, notice that there's more than one of them, right? Jostled each other within her. So they're like wrestling or something. It's like WWE SmackDown inside of her stomach, right? And she's like, why is this happening to me? So what does she do? Christian mom, right? Believing mom, what does she do? She inquires with the Lord. So she prays, God, what's going on? What's happening inside of my stomach? Why am I having these pains? Is something wrong? The Lord says to her, 2 nations are in your womb. Well, that's a lot of kids, right? Just kidding. What? Yeah, right, sure. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated, right? One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And so this is what God is telling her. And so this is prophecy about the future, because right now it's not 2 nations in her belly, it's 2 babies in her belly. But what he's saying is that these 2 babies in your belly, right, will become 2 different nations. And the 2 nations will be separated, right? And the older child, the older son, will serve the younger. So first of all, 2 nations. Who are the 2 nations? And I'll let you know right away that the 2 nations are the nation of Israel, right, the Jews, and the Edomites. And the Jews were God's people, and the Edomites were ungodly people. They were an ungodly people. They were very... I don't know how to explain it yet, but when we get to it, they were not God's people. They weren't interested in spiritual things the way that Israel was, okay? And so the 2 of them were separated. When they're separated, not only were they separated as nations, which they would be, and they'd be at odds with each other, but also they were very, very different. Just like these 2 babies inside of her womb are going to be very, very different from each other, which we'll see in a second. The stronger, right? One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And that's significant because how does it normally go? The younger serves the older, right? But God is prophesying, and he's saying, the older one is going to serve the younger, not the younger serving the older. And that is, we're going to find out that it is God's choice about which one of those 2 babies, right, is going to be prominent and which one is going to be, lesser, I guess you could say. And so when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, right? Twins, yay, right? And the first to come out was red. His whole body was hairy like a garment, so they named him Elmo. That's what they should have named him, right? But it wasn't Elmo. For those of you who don't read your Bible, it was Esau. They named him Esau, right? I was going to put a picture up there. I totally ripped that off from another pastor, but when he did it, I chuckled so hard, I said, I have to do that too. So the first to come out was red. His whole body was hairy like a garment, and they named him Esau, all right? And by the way, Esau means hairy. That's what the word Esau means, is hairy. So there you go. You can name me Esau. Give me a new nickname, right? So after this, his brother came out, right? And with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So like when he came out, right, there's a hand holding onto his heel, and he's coming out like next apparently, right? And so he was named Jacob. And what Jacob means is basically like a heel grabber, right? Like a deceiver, someone who tricks someone else. So like, I know when I was like in middle school, like there was a big thing that people would come up behind each other and put out their foot, and then somebody would give them a push or something like that, and they'd trip over your foot or something, right? That you were tricking people, right? That's kind of what it means to be a deceiver, right? A heel grabber, right? Like he was, Esau was. And what we're going to see is that he totally is a deceiving, conniving, schemer kind of person that takes advantage of others, right, to get his way and to get what he wants. And so Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to him. And so here's what you notice about this. 20 years he prayed for, right? 20 years, he didn't sin the way his father and mother did. What he did was he prayed to God for 20 years, right, for these 2 children. And finally, his wife is pregnant, and she gives birth to these 2 two twin boys, right? Now you're going to see how different the boys are as they grow up, right? The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, right? Man's man, right? He kills things with his bare hands, right? Or his bow and arrow or sticks or whatever it is, right? He hunts stuff, right? And he brings things home, right? The red hairy guy, right? Brings stuff home, and he's a man of the open country, sleeps out under the stars, he's out with the animals, he's out hunting, he's in the woods, he does all those kinds of things, right? He's the real man's man, right? And while Jacob, his younger brother, right, was content to stay at home among the tents. So he was a homebody, I guess. He was content to do the gardening around the tents, and maybe he would watch the sheep, and he'd do a little, something with the animals, but he wasn't interested in going out into the woods and hunting like his older brother was, right? He was more happy staying at home. Now, Isaac, right, their father, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, right? So this is what? This is like favoritism, right? Esau was his favorite because, oh, look at him. He's a man's man. He hunts things. He brings it home. I eat it. It's terrific, right? That's my boy, right? And then Rebekah loved Jacob, mama's boy, right? Do you know who I'm talking about, right? So Rebekah loved Jacob, right? So he stayed at home. He cooked with her. He cleaned up around the tent, he took care of the garden, he did different things. That's mama's boy, right? Which one do you like? Because I kind of like the man's man better, right? Not the mama's boy, right? So, once while Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country. He was out hunting, right? He's out in the wilderness. He didn't catch anything. He didn't kill anything. He comes home and he's famished, right? And this is like, imagine two teenage boys, right? This is like the age they are, two teenage boys, and you know how boys, not just boys, all teenagers are probably very dramatic, right? So like, it's not like, oh, I had a bad day. It's like, I had the worst day ever, right? When they're teenagers, whether it's boys or girls, it's not like, oh, today I got to school 10 minutes late. It's like, the worst thing ever happened. There's no, it wasn't too bad. It was horrible, or it was terrific, right? One extreme to the other, right? Very emotional, like teenagers are, right? So one day while Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, right? He's famished. He's so hungry, right? He said to Jacob, his brother, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." And this is why he was called Edom, by the way, because Edom means red. And so because of this incident, what he did for this red stew of his brothers, he got the nickname Red. If you ever known anybody, the guy was red, he was hairy, and he gave up something or, to do with a red stew, so he got the nickname Red. You know anybody with the nickname Red? I know several people. Usually they have red hair, right? Hey, Red, how are you doing, right? And so he gets the nickname Red, and his descendants, the nation that comes from him, gets their name from his nickname Red, Edom. That's how they become the Edomites, all right? So Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." Well, I'll talk about what the birthright is in a second, but he's a schemer, right? And so he basically says, it's not that he took advantage. He did take advantage of his brother, but his brother knew what he was doing, right? So he's like, I'll feed you. You're so hungry, right? But first, sell me your birthright. Right? Look, I'm about to die, is what Esau said. Now, do you think he's really about to die? He just came in from hunting, and he's hungry, he's starving. I'm going to die if I don't get something to eat, right? And so, look, I'm about to die. He's very dramatic, right? But he's not only dramatic, he also is very caught up on his desires, right? And forgets about the consequences, let's say, right? So, look, I'm about to die, Esau said. What good is a birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first that you'll give me your birthright. So he swore on an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. For what? For some red stew. Well, here's what you need to know. This is the birthright. The birthright was the privilege of being the head of the family, right? So the oldest son would have been the head of the family when his father was gone or when his father was older, right? And the privilege of being the priest. This was before there were priests, but he would have been the priest or the patriarch, and he would have been the spiritual leader of the family. He would have been the one that was between, if you're a father, right, or if you're a pastor. If you're a father, you are a pastor. Whether you're a good one or not is a different story. But you are the one in the spiritual head of your family. You are the one that really, lifts up those around you in essence to God. You're responsible for the spiritual health of your family between, God. I mean, everyone goes to Jesus. We don't have an intermediary, but this is kind of the way that it worked back then. He was the priest. He was the spiritual head of the family, right? And he had the privilege of that. But in his family, this carried something even more than that, because in Isaac's family, because he was a descendant of Abraham, right? Because he was Abraham's son, it included the blessing of God's promise to him and his future descendants. So remember, Abraham was blessed by God. He was given certain promises, from God, and those promises then went down to his son, only one of his sons, right? Isaac, the son of the promise, right? Not to every one of Abraham's children, just to that particular son. And now, whichever son, gets this promise from God, one of Isaac's sons now is going to inherit this promise, right? It's the one that receives the birthright, I guess you could say. And so that's what was going to happen in his family. And his family, this blessing of God's, included not just God's blessing, but also his promise to him for future descendants, which included the possession of the land, right, the promised land, Canaan, and covenant fellowship with God. Right? That they were in relationship with God through this covenant, I guess you could say. If you remember, Abraham had a covenant with God, and then Isaac took over that covenant with God, and now one of Isaac's sons is going to inherit, be the head of that covenant now with God. And it's the one that receives the birthright. And God already prophesied that which kid is going to get the birthright. It's supposed to be the older, but he said it was going to be the younger. And so then Jacob gave Esau some bread. Oh, you sold me your birthright? Here you go. Throw some bread in for the deal. Like, that makes it worthwhile, right? I hope it was really good bread, like warm with butter on it, right? Like right out of the oven, I hope, because he gave away something very valuable, and he said, what good is it to me, right? He was the kind of guy that was very dramatic, but he was also very nearsighted. Today, he's the guy that would have traded the car. Do you guys remember, Popeye? There was a guy on Popeye, I remember as a kid, and he would always say, I'll trade you a hamburger today for 3 on Tuesday, that was that kid. Or the kid, hey, if you had little siblings, little brothers and sisters or something like that, hey, I'll give you, a cookie today, and you give me all of your cookies tomorrow from your lunch, Oh, okay, and they trade it all, and then they're sad the next day when they have to give all their cookies away. That was him, right? That was Esau. He was always thinking about those things, but he was always thinking about physical, material things, and he really placed no value on spiritual things. What good is it to me? I'm starving. Give me the food, right? And so Esau, it says here, he ate, he drank, he got up, he left, and so Esau despised his birthright. That means had no value to him, right? It's as if he discarded it, something valuable, right? Something that was very valuable to God especially. So here's the question. Which son was the good son? They're both evil, right? Hey, they came from the Christian family, but they're both sinners, and they're both evil, right? Like the one could care less about spiritual things, would throw, God's things out into the trash, nothing's of any value to him except what he can get right now, today, the immediate thing. And then the other one is a huge schemer, right? And he would deceive his brother, he would to do whatever he had to do to get what he wanted, and you're going to see that he's also not a very good guy, just like his father and just like Abraham, right? And just like you and me, right? So which one was the good one? Neither one of them. They were both sinners, right? Which one deserved God's blessing? Neither one of them, right? Just like I don't deserve God's blessing, neither do you, neither does anybody else who's been saved or blessed by God, right? And which one of them deserved to be part of God's plan? Because, we're reading about them in the scriptures because they were part of God's plan, right? That was the family God chose, and then the son that God chose to work through and to bless, right? Neither one of them deserved it, right, to be part of God's plan. Just like I don't deserve to be used in God's plan, and neither does anybody else, right? We're all fallen and imperfect and sinners at best, right? Which one wanted, though, and valued God's blessing? I want God to bless me, and I want him to bless my descendants, and I want him to use me, and I want him to use my descendants, and I want to inherit those spiritual things from God, and I desire those and I value those just as much or probably more in some ways than some of the material things that I receive, right? Which one was it? Jacob, right? Jacob was the one. Which one rejected God's blessing and being part of God's plan and said, oh, I'm starving. What good are those spiritual things to me, right? Esau, right? Which one rejected his blessing and he rejected being part of God's plan and being used by God? Which one did God choose and bless, though, and accomplish his plan through? Jacob, the younger son, right? The mama's boy, right? I'm not happy about that. I wish he used the man's man, right? But he used the mama's boy, right? We're going to see, and God is going to work on him in the future, but he used him and he chose him to bless and to work through the two sons. Why did he choose him? It wasn't because he deserved it. It wasn't because, he was a conniver. He was a deceiver, right? He was a trickster, right? That was his name from birth. And he was constantly doing things like this. You're going to see him take advantage of his brother again later on. You're going to see how the two parents, by having, favorites, which don't do this, right? If you're a parent, don't have favorites. You're going to see how the favoritism of the parents and the way that, that they treated them probably rubbed off on the way that the kids and the brothers treated each other. That this one's the favorite, nope, that one's the favorite. It caused division between them, and it caused hostility between them. And I'm sure that Isaac would have thought, I'm not going to mess up my kids the way my dad messed up our family. And yet he did the same thing, just in a different way, by having favorites, right? Because we're all fallen and we're all sinners, right? So it was by grace, right, undeserved, unmerited, that God chose Isaac's son Jacob, right? But it was also because of this, because Jacob valued God's blessing, where Esau could care less about spiritual things and only cared about the immediate physical and those kinds of things, right? Jacob valued God's blessing, right? He wanted it. He was willing to trade it. He was willing to buy it, right? He wanted God's blessing, and his desire was for something better that God had promised in the future. Not what I'm going to get today. Here, I'll give you all of the food. I'll even throw in some bread. I'll give you whatever you want today for God's blessing and his promises for the future, right? And that's why God chose and worked through him, right? Well, it was God's purpose to do it. We don't know for sure why, but we can see this, play out, I guess you could say. And the thing is that, do you think that, maybe he regretted it in the future, giving it up? Scripture tells us that he did. The writer of Hebrews tells us what happens eventually. We don't know how long it is. We don't know if it's the next year. We don't know if it was when they were old men. We don't know when it happened. But eventually, he actually regretted selling his birthright to his brother. And so the writer of Hebrews tells us, but he tells us while he's talking about what kind of Christian, I guess you could say, to be, or what kind of believer to be, and he's telling him how not to be. And we'll read the verse. It's Hebrews 12, 16 to 17. He says, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterwards, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. It was too late. Regret, right? And no way to take it back. See, life is full of trade-offs. We can't have everything, right? You and I, and everyone ever born, right? We only have so much time. We only have so much money. We only have so much energy. We only have so much attention. How will we spend it? You know how you'll spend it? How you spend it will depend on what you value. How you spend that time, that money, that energy, that attention will depend on what you value, right? How can we avoid regret when it comes to our participation in God's plan? We need to value future spiritual blessing so that we don't trade it for temporary gain. You know what? The next day, Esau was hungry again. And he was hungry the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that, right? But Jacob had that future blessing and future promises from God for him and for his descendants forever, right? We need to stop trading. We need to value future spiritual blessings and stop trading them for temporary gain. If you want to avoid the regret that comes with our participation, avoid any regret as far as participation in God's plan. See, here's the big idea, that valuing today's desires over future blessings leads to coming regret. Valuing today's desires over future blessings leads to coming regret. And I'll give you some examples as we go along, but I think of parents all the time that their highest thing for their kids, and they want their kids to succeed in this, and they want their kids to be successful at that, and they want their kids to be, these other things, and all of the emphasis, all of the time, all of the energy goes into those things, whether it's education, whether it's sports, whether it's recreation, whether it's hobbies, or whatever it is. All of your time, all of your money, all of your energy goes to something. What is it going toward? Is it all toward things that are, short-sighted and nothing as far as future spiritual blessings, right? We trade the immediate for the important. When we trade the immediate for the important, we're despising God's plan. How are we doing this? How are we despising God's plan when we trade the immediate for the important? Well, like Esau, we don't value it and we don't want to be part of it. So, you know what? We don't get involved in a church and go regularly. We don't share our faith with other people, right? We don't spread the gospel. We don't support, ministries. We don't volunteer. We don't teach. We don't teach our children. We don't bring our children. We don't talk to our children about certain things, or our neighbors about spiritual things, right? Our largest desires for our kids and those around us is, I want them to be successful. I want them to be happy. I want them to be this and that and the other thing. But we don't give any, value to, I want them to be in a right relationship with God. I want them to inherit spiritual blessings, not just financial and material ones. I want them to, when, they're on their bed, deathbed, dying of cancer, that they would have hope. And their hope isn't going to be in their college education, and their hope isn't going to be in, the recreations that they did and the classes that they took and those other things. I hope that my children, after I'm gone, would still have hope and still, follow Jesus and still know about Jesus, right? And I know that other people do as well if you're a believer. The issue is that we're oftentimes short-sighted and we trade the immediate for the important. Oh, my kid can be in this, and they can be that, and I can do this, and I can participate in this hobby, and I can get money toward this, and I can work a little extra here and get this thing that I want, right? But like Esau, we don't value God's plan, and we don't really want to be part of it, right? So you and I, and this is me too, right? We might want God to bless our plan, but do we really want to be part of His plan? Like, you know what? I want God to give me this, and I want God to do that for me, and I want God to, give me the wife of my dreams, and give me a better job, and give me more this, and give me that, and I want my kids to do this and be successful, and I want these things and those things. But what if there's hardship in God's plan to give me what He desires for me? You know what? When it comes right down to it, we often want God to bless our plans, but we don't want to be part of His plan. And we'll trade future spiritual blessings, right, in the future for temporary, gains today. You know what? We could go to church today. We can bring the kids. We can go and serve. I can volunteer and I can teach other young kids about Jesus or something like that. Or I could talk to this person. Or, we can go have fun today. We can go hunting. We can do this. We can have, play golf. We can, sleep in this morning. We can do whatever it is. And then when our kids get older and we're like, what? You're not a Christian? Like, you're not, God is sovereign over salvation, but we often lose sight of what's actually important, and we trade the immediate for the important. You might want God to bless your plans, but don't actually want to be a part or struggle with being a part of His plan. So let me give you some examples here. Giving money, and we never ask people for money here at church. But all of these things, whether it's your checkbook, whether it's your calendar, whether it's who you talk to and the conversations you talk to, whether it's you think about, are a spiritual thermometer. You stick a thermometer and see if you have, how your health is, right? It's the same thing with all of those things. So where does your time go? Where does your money go? Where do your thoughts go? What do you spend your time doing, right? And so if you give money to the church, if it's a good church, right, you're not just giving money. You're financing the Great Commission. The money you give is so that other people can hear the gospel, right? They can hear that Jesus died for their sins and there is nothing that they can do to be right with God, but God already did it for us. They hear the gospel and they, can be saved, right? They can place their faith and trust in Jesus because now they've heard about Him. Now they understand. Now they've heard the word over and over again. And when you give money, right, you're not just giving money. You're participating in the plan of God to reach people with the gospel. Right? You are financing the Great Commission, right? There will be people in heaven that you don't know, or maybe even some in your neighborhoods that you do know, that you have met because of your giving, right? If you're a parent, I know when Jen and I, first had our son, we started going to church. I wasn't a Christian. We'd sit there and my son would be, they didn't have nursery and children's church back then, and my son would be like, going crazy, and we'd be thinking to ourselves, I can't pay attention. Why are we even here? We should stay home, because we're a disruption to other people. And, and that's kind of what we thought. So I understand anybody who brings their kids here maybe thinking that, this is chaos in the morning, Sunday morning, getting up and dragging the kids out, getting them dressed and all that kind of thing. And you're thinking, I'm just bringing my kid to church every week. But you're not just bringing your kid to church every week. You're influencing the next generation for Jesus. You're participating in the plan of God, right? And there will be people in heaven, hopefully with your last name, because of what you're doing. God's the one that saves people, but you know what? You're bringing them, you're showing them that this is important, and you're participating in the plan of God to reach the next generation. Same thing with if you're a volunteer, if you're a teacher. I know that you ladies and guys who come in here and volunteer and you teach the kids downstairs and it's chaos and it's like, is anybody even listening? And I'm preparing at home and I'm doing this work and I'm not sure I'm equipped to be a teacher and I don't know if kids is my thing and all that kind of thing, right? And you're just not even sure when you go home that they're even listening. You just feel like maybe you're babysitting them downstairs, but you're not just babysitting kids. You're influencing the next generation by teaching them about Jesus, right? There might be people in heaven that you taught or you influenced long after you're gone because of what you did, because you were participating in the plan of God to reach the next generation, to reach young people, to take our spot when we're gone, right? And you won't just be holding your marriage together, because I know there are some people that they come to church when they're having issues, and they're just thinking, well, this would be good for our marriage. We need to come to church, and we need to listen to this. Maybe we need to study the Bible. Maybe we need to start praying together, and we do all those things, and we think, I'm just going to have a better marriage. It's just going to fix the problem in our relationship or something like that. But when you do that, right, when you start reading Scripture together, when you start praying together, when you start attending to church together, when you start serving together, right, you're not just holding your marriage together. You are reestablishing God's order in society of a husband, a wife, a family, an order that has been lost or is being lost in our society today. You are participating in the plan of God to reestablish marriages and families, right, in our churches, in our society, in our community. See, I thought of doing this, but I completely forgot about it, so I'm sorry. I was going to take a big, long string, and I was going to, you know how I do projects sometimes and examples? I was going to tie a string back there all the way from that end of the room to this end of the room, and I've kind of done this before, but not in the same way, and I was going to put a little mark on it, about an inch, from the end, and that string was going to represent all of eternity, and basically, the first inch on there, this is not to scale, obviously, right? But the first inch on there was going to be our lifetime, mine and yours. And all of the plans that we make and all of the things we sacrifice, you know what? I worked a little more, I got this, I slept in that day, I did that. All of these things that we sacrifice that we can't wait for in our life, is like that long, on that string that goes all the way across the room. And then the rest of it is all eternity. Just that little inch, right, would be our lifetime or our lifespan, right? And all of the things that we, do, all the motivations we have and stuff like that are often motivated by that little inch on there. And we forget that later is longer. Eternity is a lot longer than our lifetime. And you know what? Everything you worked for, the bigger house, the newer car, everything you invested in your kids so they'd have an education, so they do this, so they do the other thing, whatever it is that you taught them. I taught them to throw a football, I taught them, in sports, I did this, I did that, the other thing. All of that is going to be gone once that 1 inch is gone. It's only the spiritual things that are going to go on for the rest of that string in eternity. You know what? I taught my children about Jesus. You know what? I shared Jesus with the kids in the Sunday school. You know what? I was helping in society to reestablish marriage, and that's going to go on not just in my marriage, but my children's marriage and the marriages after that, right? And you and I have the privilege of being part of God's plan. But when we trade the immediate for the important, we sacrifice future blessing for temporary gains. Let's pray.